You're right, veganism does not necessarily mean that you have a healthy diet, and in fact lots of vegan food can be processed. And I think lots of evidence points to, though, even though a vegan processed diet is probably still healthier for you than eating a processed diet that involves meat. However, of course, the best possible food that anyone can eat is plant-based food that is healthy. In terms of what I eat, I'm pretty guilty of the junk food. I live in central London, and I think very easily accessible by bike is lots of various junk food, but I am getting better actually. And the more, I guess, I'm surrounded by evidence about what junk food is doing to your body, as opposed to eating a good, healthy diet, I am starting to move in the right direction. My boyfriend's an excellent cook, which also helps. The McPlant is a more complicated argument for me, because I totally get when people say, don't boycott McDonald's because actually they're doing the right thing on this, so it would be good to support when businesses do the right thing. But I find McDonald's a particularly egregious example where no matter how much they're doing the right thing, I still don't particularly want to support them. And all of my politics is about systemic change, not individual responsibility, so there is no judgment in that. And I get it if people are busy, particularly if they have kids, and they think I'd rather just go to McDonald's and give my kids some McPlant because it's quicker and at least they're eating something vegan, but I prefer not to do that with McDonald's. I guess, how do I justify the Greggs sausage roll? I just feel like I have a better relationship with Greggs. There's a quote I absolutely love from the Welsh thinker and writer Raymond Williams, which is, to be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing. And I just always think, as a politician or anyone in public life, my role is ultimately to see a positive vision for the world, for our country, alongside communities, and then every single day do everything we can to make that world possible. So that's not being complacent about the challenges, and it's not ignoring the real threat there is to our planet. Yes, a crisis of climate, but ultimately a crisis of nature and ecological collapse. I think recognizing all those things are there, but ultimately knowing that we know the solutions, and I think that's the hope here. It's not like we have this big crisis and we don't know what we have to do. The problems are not technical, they are not financial, they're political. And ultimately, the solutions are there. People just have to go out and vote for them.
Sure.
Absolutely, this is one of the most important questions that can be asked. I talk all the time about how there's no environmental justice without racial, social and economic justice too. And in fact, when I just addressed the Green Party conference very recently, I talked about animal justice. Ultimately, we need to make sure that we're standing up for all beings, especially those that don't have a voice. I think the most powerful thing any politician can do is speak to the most vulnerable people in our society, and that's act as a conduit to hold the powerful to account and challenge truth to power. Now, I do that with lots of different vulnerable groups, but of course, animal groups I can't speak to, but I think we can be pretty clear that they want to be liberated, they want to be free. And ultimately, I think it's important that everyone in public life does everything they can to make sure they're making that case. Yeah, there's loads of things that we need to do to decarbonise to make sure that we're hitting net zero and that essentially our future has a livable planet. A lot of that is around housing and transport, and I'm actually doing lots of things around that area too. Food is one of those areas that people don't often talk about, and I think because it can often feel quite visceral to people, the idea that you're being asked to change your diet. I think when we have these conversations, we need to handle them sensitively, and one of the things I'm really keen on, I've been speaking to an organisation recently called Pro-Veg. They're working particularly in schools around making sure that school children have options around plant-based food. This isn't about taking meat away from people, it's actually about doing things like making sure that a plant-based option is the default option. There's lots of science and research that suggests if you nudge people towards a healthier option that is better for the planet, then people are happy with that option and they will take it. Of course, if people don't want to take it, then it is important that we have other options too. My work with the Mayor is really pushing him, I guess, to look at what responsibility can he take as Mayor of London, and whether that's around schools, public buildings, hospitals, etc., making sure that everyone has access to a healthy meal that is good for the planet. Yeah, we live in a situation at the moment where undoubtedly there can often be privilege related to a vegan diet. A lot of the restaurants and takeaways, the food, if it's vegan, is much more expensive. And we know in our supermarkets too, the vegan option is often more expensive. That's a completely unacceptable situation. And ultimately, rather than subsidise the meat industry, I'd like to see governments, regional, local, national, subsidising plant-based food and helping people reduce the climate impact and also present healthier options. I'm wondering at this point if it's even Tory light. Like, it's probably a little bit fair on him. I think the most egregious thing that Keir Starmer's done in his time of being leader is to not criticise Rishi Sunak's decision to open the new Rosebank oil field. For those who don't know, this is 500 million barrels of oil. That's equivalent to 28 of the lowest income countries, all their carbon emissions put together. That's 700 million people. We talk about climate justice and social justice. This is a huge body of people that have had no decision, no say in the decisions of the British government. And all Keir Starmer needed to do was say no. Admittedly, he's not in government, but if he gave that very clear signal, he would then have created investor uncertainty, which meant that Equinor, the Norwegian fossil fuel giant, and all the investors would not have gone ahead with this. And the reason why I say it's particularly egregious is, with no respect to the Tories, 13 years of Tory austerity is literally killing people and it's killing our planet. But they don't even pretend to care about the environment anymore, so at least that's got some level of honesty. But to have Keir Starmer and other Labour politicians talk about green credentials and talk about the environment, yet wade through oil and gas fields, you could argue is sending us backwards. You don't get a gold star for being better than the Tories. You don't get a gold star for pretending that everything's okay. Ultimately, the planet does not care about politics, it cares about physics. If I'm really honest, my favourite takeaway order is Ready Burger. Community empowerment informs everything around my politics. I think one of the best examples I can give of this is the first time I was elected, I could challenge London Mayor Sadiq Khan about anything, and I asked him about citizens' assemblies. The idea of having Londoners or anybody come into City Hall and have their voice speak. And his response to me was that I should be careful that I wasn't in danger of making myself redundant. Now, that's not particularly an attack on the London Mayor. I think that comes from a lot of politicians. It's that kind of top-down establishment politics. But really, the best politics comes from the grassroots up. It's about genuinely engaging with communities. Having a viewpoint, so I don't believe in just going in as a blank sheet of paper and letting people inform your views. I think you come in with expertise, you come in with a clear direction for what is best for people and planet. Ultimately, you do listen to people and you make sure that people are both guiding your politics and you're guiding them. It's this beautiful, symbiotic relationship where there's that total feedback loop. And I think if you're missing that, you're not doing community empowerment. Ultimately, we want to be in a position where communities are so empowered that politics is happening at the most local level it can possibly be, and that's at the heart of green politics. Yeah, I'm really excited about universal basic income. Martin Luther King said it could literally eradicate poverty, so it is not a new idea. For those who don't know, it's just a simple idea that every single citizen in the country gets a set amount of money that is not conditional based on if they're working or not working. We're trying to remove those barriers around deserving and undeserving poor. This isn't just for people in poverty, it's essentially giving everyone financial security to be able to do what they want to do and live their lives with purpose, rather than feeling like they're just on the treadmill or just trying to survive. When looking at universal basic income, it's really important that people from minority communities, people with disabilities, are at the centre of that conversation from the very beginning, because we absolutely need to make sure that when people receive a basic income, they're in a better off position than they are now. I'm quite sceptical of some of the big tech companies that support universal basic income. It doesn't mean that I stop supporting the idea. The idea is really crucial. But I think with anything, you have to be careful of the storyteller, and you also have to look at what is the message they're trying to deliver and why are they trying to deliver it. I think the fundamentals of basic income are really important, but I think it needs to work alongside things like good trade union representation to make sure that people are still empowered to find collective bargaining, that they are not at the mercy of corporate CEOs or big bosses who are earning ridiculous amounts of money, and also that the state is not subsidising companies to pay their workers less. So all of this needs to be looked at holistically. Having said that, of all the kind of solutions that I see to the cost of living crisis and the climate crisis and automation and artificial intelligence, I'm yet to see one stronger than a basic income in terms of its ability to radically transform our society and also give people freedom to be able to live the lives that they want to live while feeling connected to their communities. I think all the changes around political donations are super important, alongside media reform as well. I don't think we can get to any of those things until we get proportional representation. For those who don't know, we have an unfair voting system at the moment of first past the post. It disproportionately favours the two old parties, Tories and Labour, and that's why they do everything they can to defend it and hold on to it. They very often say that proportional representation would let in extremist parties, but I think when we've just seen footage of Nigel Farage and Priti Patel dancing at a Conservative conference, it's pretty clear that the main party in government has been hijacked by an extremist party and no one voted for it. So I don't have much truck with those arguments. Proportional representation would ultimately make sure that people's votes match seats. So if 5% of the country voted for 5% of a party, they would get 5% of the seats. 10% of the country, 10% of the seats. It's literally proportional. The clue is in the name. Yeah, so when people talk about wasted votes or tactical votes, I think when the Labour Party are complicit in the climate crimes of the new Rosebank oil field, when they're refusing to stand with striking workers, when they won't even lift the child benefit cap, 1 in 4 children are living in poverty. That's not an acceptable status quo, and ultimately we need a party that will make sure that every single child in this country has food in their tummy and heat in their homes. When the Labour Party can't even commit to tackling the climate emergency and tackling the mass injustice in our society, it's very clear that voting Labour is not a tactical vote. Ultimately, if you want to tackle the climate emergency and mass injustice in our society, the most tactical vote you can make, and voting with your head and your heart, is to vote Green. And when people say, yes, but we need to get the Tories out, ultimately, what are you getting the Tories out for? If they're being replaced by a group of Labour politicians who are further to the right than David Cameron was in 2010, you're ultimately just electing another Conservative government in a different name. And actually that won't last either, because they won't deal with the mass inequality in society. The country will be upset. The country will be understandably hurt with the amount of poverty and desolation we have in our country. And they will just elect the Tories back in again for another 13, 14 years. So actually, if we want to get out of this cycle, this self-perpetuating cycle of Labour and Conservatives adopting neoliberal and hyper-capitalist agendas, then ultimately we do need to vote Green. Yeah, so I'm concerned about lots of toxic narratives in society, and I think the most obvious is around migration. So Keir Starmer often criticises Rishi Sunak's Stop the Boats plan, but he doesn't criticise it because it's inhumane. He criticises it because it's inefficient. And I think it's really important that we tell positive stories about migration. So for instance, if you're using the National Health Service, the person who is serving you is much more likely to be a migrant than anyone in front of you in the queue. When people say that they're worried about housing, about healthcare, about infrastructure, those are all legitimate fears. But those fears have been founded by 13 years of Conservative austerity and by a Labour Party who refused to tell positive stories about migration. But actually they've just adopted the clothes and the costume of the Conservative narrative around problems of people flooding this country, supposedly. And I think unless we start to challenge those narratives in the strongest possible terms, and present a positive vision of society, then we'll continue to have this divisive toxic politics. And then the final thing I'd say is that no is not enough, and I'm coining that from Naomi Klein. We can't just keep talking about things we need to ban or sacrifice, or just say no to awful things that Conservatives and Labour are proposing. Ultimately, we need to talk about tackling the climate emergency. Is a chance to invest in cleaner air, more cohesive communities, to put money into walking and cycling and better public transport, to make sure that that public transport is affordable and accessible, and to make sure that people have good, decent jobs with a living wage and that they're unionised. We could be insulating every single home in this country that needs it. That's a triple win. It lowers bills, it reduces emissions, and it creates green jobs. There's that vision of a positive society, and it's quite clear and it's quite tangible. I think we need to talk about that more and make sure that everyone can feel that in a visceral way, because that's the future worth fighting for. So before I was a politician, I was an actor. So arts and culture is particularly important to me. But actually, I don't think this is any different to any of the questions I've answered already, because ultimately what we need to do in this country is tell better stories and more effective stories. And there's a reason why the Conservative government call arts and culture Mickey Mouse storytelling. It's because they're absolutely terrified that if people can see clearly and speak clearly and in an articulate way challenge power, then that's one of the most dangerous things to any established government. Arts and culture is a great levelling up as well. If you make sure those opportunities are available for ethnic minority communities, for working class communities, for people who don't speak in necessarily the way that it's been considered, receive pronunciation, or have an accent, all of those ways are ways of making sure that we're highlighting and amplifying those stories and giving everyone's voice equal weight, whether that's on the national level or whether that's just in your local community centre. And finally, I think people talk about serious youth violence, and it's something that is serious, but actually we know the police are over-policing and under-protecting people. And one of the most vital things we can do in terms of prevention is to make sure that young people have places to go to. So whether that's local youth services, whether it's sport, or whether it's arts and culture, all of those are ways of engaging with people and essentially putting them on a more positive path. Look, I'm an elected politician. I've chaired the Environment Committee for the last couple of years. So although I may have in the past, and in fact I was arrested in the past, I don't feel the need to sit on roads anymore or to chain myself to things. However, I can completely understand why people do. When someone writes to me because they're concerned about something, I can directly challenge the mayor about it. I'm often talking to cabinet ministers or shadow cabinet ministers on the media. So my kind of activism has an outlet, and I'm able to amplify the voices of millions of people who want to see action on climate. But yes, absolutely, civil disobedience has always had a role in our society, whether it's through the suffragettes, whether it's through the civil rights movement. Ultimately, the freedom to protest has to have a place in our society. I'm pretty sure I haven't ever eaten at a Michelin star restaurant. But it becomes from doing so. I guess it depends who's paying. Post food at its best is about community. It's about groups of people getting together and again sharing stories, sharing how the day's been, their life's going, and then breaking bread together, literally. And I suppose a very, very expensive restaurant feels like it's the other extreme of that event, where it's about exclusivity and who isn't allowed in that space. My favourite culinary guilty pleasure is actually at Walthamstow Market on a Sunday. Is a Caribbean vegan stallholder. I want to say his name's Mark, but forgive me if I'm wrong on that. But he creates a vegan chocolate pie and chocolate cake, and it's gorgeous. And I've had to ration myself because it was becoming a Sunday thing to always travel to Walthamstow and get this cake, and actually that's just impractical in terms of a busy schedule, and also it's impractical in terms of keeping the weight down. So proportional representation would be one, but the second, I've been working a lot with an organisation called United Voices of the World. They describe themselves as a low-paid migrant workers union for black and brown workers. When I first met them a few years ago, I was working with some care workers. They'd worked throughout the pandemic, so when we were safe and locked away in our homes, these were the people who were looking after older people who were sick with long-term health conditions. They're from all over the world: Nigeria, Jamaica, Ecuador, pretty much every country you could ever think of. And when they first complained about their working conditions and their wage, they were rewarded by the CEO with pizza. And in fact, it was worse than that, it was cold pizza. So I went along with them to the picket line, I spoke to the news media, and now I'm really proud that they're some of the highest paid care workers in the city. So unions work, collective solidarity works, and standing with hidden workers work. But I just think about how many low-paid black and brown migrant workers are working throughout London where I don't know their story yet, or they haven't got in touch with the United Voices of the World. So I think that's definitely a story that's regularly missing from our national conversation.